Minus 30 degrees, outside no furnace, running no insulation in the walls. Just a thin shell of corrugated steel standing alone in a frozen white field. And somewhere inside that shell, a man is sleeping in a t-shirt. No shivering, no frostbite, just slow, steady breathing in a room warm enough to make you sweat. That should not be possible. Steel is a terrible insulator. Cold should be pouring through those walls like water through a sieve. And yet, all across rural Alaska, men are living inside these curved steel tubes through the harshest winters on the planet, and they are doing it comfortably. Tonight, you're going to find out exactly how. This is not a survival story. This is an engineering story. And by the end of it, you'll understand something that almost nobody talks about. The shape of a building can matter more than the material it is built from. Most people assume comfort in this kind of cold requires expensive technology, military-grade equipment, or some secret only government researchers know. It does not. What you are about to see is built from steel sheeting, foam, and a handful of decisions any determined man could make himself on a modest budget with ordinary tools. The men living through this every winter are not soldiers, and they are not scientists. They are carpenters, fishermen, and off-grid homesteaders who simply refuse to accept that comfort and extreme cold cannot coexist. Picture the wind first. It is not gentle. It does not whisper. It screams across open tundra at speeds that can knock a grown man off his feet, carrying snow so fine it feels like sand on bare skin. The temperature gauge reads minus 30, but the wind makes it feel closer to minus 50. At that temperature, exposed skin can freeze in under 10 minutes. A man caught outside without the right gear is in real danger, fast. This is the world outside the steel tube. Now picture the inside. Soft light. A heater glowing red in the corner. A man lying under a thick blanket, completely unbothered by the apocalypse happening 20 feet away on the other side of a sheet of metal. The contrast is almost unbelievable. And the secret to that contrast starts with shape most people overlook completely. The arch. A square cabin has corners. 8 of them, if you count where the walls meet the floor and ceiling. Every single corner is a weak point. Heat does not like corners. It escapes through them constantly, in a process called thermal bridging, where cold from outside finds the shortest path through a structure's frame and rushes straight through it like a crack in a dam. A Quonset hut has 0 corners. It is one continuous curve, from the ground on one side, up and over, down the ground on the other side. There is nowhere for cold to sneak through, because there is no seam for it to find. That alone is not enough to survive minus 30. The shape buys a man an advantage, but it does not win the fight on its own. The real battle happens in 3 layers, and if a man gets even one of them wrong, the whole system falls apart quietly, long before he ever realizes it. Layer 1 is the skin of the building. Bare steel against Arctic air is basically nothing. It will feel exactly as cold inside as it is outside, maybe worse, because metal pulls heat out of a room faster than almost any other material. So the very first thing every smart Quonset owner does, before furniture, before flooring, before anything else, is spray the entire inside of that steel shell with closed-cell spray foam. Not fiberglass bats. Not blankets stapled to the wall. Spray foam, because it is liquid when it goes on, and it expands to fill every gap, every ridge, every tiny imperfection in that curved steel. It bonds directly to the metal and creates an unbroken seal with almost no air gaps at all. Once it cures, that foam becomes a barrier strong enough to hold back a deep freeze almost completely on its own. Here's where most men get it wrong, and where things start to go sideways fast if they're not paying attention. Spray foam is not cheap. A full hut can run into thousands of dollars just for this one step, sometimes climbing past $4,000 or $5,000 depending on the size of the structure. So some owners try to cut corners, literally and figuratively. They foam half the structure and leave the rest bare, thinking they will get to it later. They never do, and the very first hard freeze finds that gap instantly. Heat does not care about good intentions. It finds the weakest point in structure and pours out through it relentlessly all winter long, every single night, draining fuel and money along with it. That is the first lesson hidden inside this story. The survival system is not measured by its strongest point. It is measured by its weakest one. One unsealed gap can undo $1,000 of perfect insulation elsewhere, and a man will never see it happening. He will only feel it every night, as a cold draft he cannot quite explain. Layer 2 is moisture, and this is a part almost nobody warns you about until it is too late. A heated room full of warm, humid air sitting right next to a freezing steel wall creates the perfect conditions for condensation. Moisture from breathing, cooking, even just existing in that space, drifts toward the cold metal and turns to water inside a wall cavity. That water does not just sit there quietly. It freezes, it thaws, it refreezes over months. That cycle can rot wood framing, rust steel, and quietly destroy the very insulation a man paid thousands of dollars to install. The fix is a vapor barrier, a thin sheet of plastic or a specially designed membrane placed on the warm side of the insulation before the interior wall goes up. It stops moist indoor air from ever reaching that cold steel skin in the first place. Skip this step, and a man might not see the damage for an entire year. By the time he does, the inside of his walls could already be soaked, frozen solid, and silently failing him exactly when he needs them most on the coldest night of the season. Layer 3 is the one almost every beginner forgets entirely. The floor. Cold does not just come through walls. It rises straight up through concrete slabs like smoke through a chimney. A man can insulate his walls perfectly, seal every seam with spray foam, hang the thickest curtains money can buy over every window, and still wake up every single night with feet so cold they ache, because the floor underneath him is acting like a direct pipeline straight down into frozen earth. Rigid foam board under the slab, or a properly insulated subfloor system above it, closes that pipeline completely. Without it, a man is essentially sleeping on top of a block of ice with a thin rug between him and the cold. It is easy to underestimate just how much heat a bare slab can pull from a room. Concrete holds cold the way a sponge holds water, and once it has soaked up that chill from the frozen ground beneath it, it radiates that cold back upward for hours, long after a stove has been roaring at full strength. A few inches of rigid foam, laid down before the slab is ever poured, or retrofitted underneath a raised wooden subfloor afterward, is often the cheapest single upgrade a man can make, and yet is the one most frequently skipped during the initial build. Now the structure is sealed. Foam in the walls. A vapor barrier holding moisture at bay. Insulation under the floor. The shell is finally ready to actually hold heat instead of leaking it. But a sealed shell with no heat source inside is just a very well-insulated freezer. So now comes the part everyone is really waiting for. How do these men actually generate heat strong enough to fight back against -30 night after night? For months at a time? Wood stoves come first, because they're the backbone of rural Alaskan heating, and have been for generations. A good cast iron stove fed steadily can push a small steel hut from freezing to uncomfortably warm in under an hour. Fuel is everywhere if a man has land and a chainsaw, which makes it the cheapest heating option by a massive margin. Often a fraction of the monthly cost of propane or diesel delivered by truck. But wood comes with a price that has nothing to do with money. It demands attention. A stove needs to be fed constantly. Let it die out at 3 a.m. during a blizzard, and a man wakes up to a room already plunging toward freezing again, fast, with frost already forming on the inside of the windows. This is exactly where the second hidden hook in the story comes in, and it is a kind of detail that separates men who merely survive from men who actually sleep soundly. Many seasoned owners do not rely on one heat source. They run 2 systems at once. A wood stove as a primary heat engine and a small electric or propane heater as a silent backup, positioned right next to the bed. If the fire dies in the middle of the night, the backup catches a temperature drop before it ever reaches dangerous levels. Redundancy is not paranoia out here. It is the difference between a quiet night and a genuine emergency that ends with frostbitten fingers and a very bad morning. Beyond wood, plenty of huts run on diesel or propane forced air furnaces, the kind that kick on automatically and need almost no daily attention. They are more expensive to fuel, but for a man who has gone all day working or who simply does not want to manage a fire every few hours, they are worth every extra dollar. And then there is the newest option reshaping how people heat extreme cold spaces entirely: cold climate mini split heat pumps. A few years ago, heat pumps were considered useless below freezing. Now, the newest generation can keep pulling usable heat from outside air down to temperatures as low as minus 25 degrees, running on electricity alone, with none of the smoke, none of the fuel deliveries, and almost none of the maintenance that wood or propane demand. Here is the detail that genuinely surprises most viewers the first time they hear it, and it is a third hidden hook woven into this whole story. Some of the most comfortable Quonset owners barely heat the entire structure at all. Instead, they heat the man. A small radiant space heater tucked right beside the bed, an electric blanket running quietly under the sheets, a heated mattress pad warming the exact spot where a man's body will rest for 8 straight hours. Why pour expensive fuel into warming an entire steel tube full of empty air, when the only air that actually matters is a few cubic feet directly around a sleeping body? It is a strategy borrowed straight from how soldiers and explorers have survived extreme cold for over a century. Stop fighting the whole environment and start protecting the one small space that truly matters. But heating systems alone do not finish the job. The smallest details are usually the ones that quietly decide whether a night feels cozy or feels like a fight for survival. Doors and windows are the single biggest weak point in almost every cold weather structure on Earth. A spray foam wall can be absolutely flawless, and a single poorly sealed door frame can undo a meaningful share of that effort in an instant. Cold air does not need a big gap to get in. It only needs a thin one, and it will find it every single time. Weather stripping, double pane glass, even something as simple as a heavy curtain hung directly over a door, can each shave off a noticeable chunk of heat loss for almost no cost at all. A single tube of caulk and an afternoon of work can save a man more warmth than an entire extra heater running all night long. Snow itself, strange as it sounds, becomes an ally rather than an enemy. A thick berm of snow piled up against the base of a Quonset hut acts almost exactly like a blanket thrown over the bottom of the structure. Snow traps air inside its crystal structure, and trapped air is a surprisingly effective insulator. Many experienced owners do not shovel snow away from their walls in winter. They pile it on intentionally, packing it firmly against the base, turning the very thing trying to kill them into one more layer of protection. It is one of the oldest survival tricks on Earth, borrowed from igloos, and it still works exactly as well today as it did centuries ago. Humidity matters more than most people expect as well. Heated air inside a sealed steel structure dries out fast, and dry air at low humidity feels colder against the skin than the thermometer suggests, while also cracking lips, drying sinuses, and making sleep less restful overall. A simple humidifier running through the night can make a 70-degree room feel noticeably warmer and far more comfortable just by putting a small amount of moisture back into that bone-dry heated air. It sounds like a small detail. It is not. Men who skip it often complain of waking up exhausted, with no idea why, when the real culprit was sitting on a shelf the entire time. And then there is a question almost nobody wants to think about until it actually happens. What happens when the heat fails completely? A propane truck that cannot reach a remote hut for 2 weeks during a blizzard. A generator that will not start in deep cold. A wood supply that runs out faster than expected during an unusually brutal stretch of weather. This is not a hypothetical fear story added for drama. This is the real reason backup heat sources, stockpile fuel, and layered survival gear matter so much out here. A single point of failure in a normal climate is an inconvenience. A single point of failure at minus 30 degrees can become a genuine life-threatening emergency within hours, and every experienced owner out here has at least one story about the night it almost happened to him. That is exactly why the smartest men in this environment never build a one-layer plan. They stack extra firewood high enough to last weeks beyond what they think they will need. They keep a second propane tank full and sealed, untouched for emergencies only. They keep battery-powered lanterns and hand warmers within arm's reach of the bed every single night, without exception, because the one night a man decides he does not need to bother is statistically the exact night something goes wrong. Step back now and look at the full picture. A curved steel shell with no corners for a cold to exploit. A thick, seamless layer of spray foam locking that shell against the outside world. A vapor barrier protecting the insulation from silently rotting away from the inside. Insulated flooring stopping cold from rising up through the earth itself. A primary heat source doing the heavy lifting, backed by a secondary system standing by in case the first one fails. Smart, deliberate choices around doors, windows, snow, and humidity, each one adding a small percentage of comfort that stacks up into something significant by the end of a long winter. And finally, the smartest trick of all, hiding in plain sight. Heating the man, not the building, whenever possible. None of this is luck. None of this is some unbreakable secret only insiders know. It is layered, deliberate engineering, built one decision at a time by men who learned, often the hard way, exactly what extreme cold demands from a structure and from the person living inside it. Every single layer exists because someone, somewhere, learned the hard way what happens when it is missing. And when every layer comes together correctly, the result is exactly what you saw at the very beginning of this story. A man sleeping peacefully in a t-shirt, completely unbothered, while a genuine Arctic nightmare rages just a few feet away on the other side of a thin sheet of steel. It is worth pausing on the numbers, because they explain why so many men out here choose steel arches over traditional cabins in the first place. A fully insulated Quonset hut, foam, vapor barrier, flooring, and a basic heating setup included, can often be finished for a fraction of what a comparable stick-built cabin would cost, sometimes coming in at well under half the price for the same usable square footage. Add in lower monthly heating costs once wood or a cold climate heat pump is running efficiently, and the savings compound year after year, winter after winter. For a man try to live remotely without draining his savings, that math matters just as much as the comfort does. That gap between chaos and comfort is not magic. It is preparation, layer by layer, decision by decision, built long before the first snowflake of the season ever falls. It is the quiet difference between a man who fears winter and a man who simply outsmarts it, year after year, storm after storm, without ever raising his voice about it. There is a strange kind of confidence that settles into a man once he has built a system like this with his own hands. He stops checking the weather report with dread. He stops flinching at the sound of wind hammering the steel above his head. He knows exactly why he is warm, layer by layer, decision by decision, and that knowledge is worth more than any single piece of gear inside that hut. The storm outside has not changed. -30 is still -30. What has changed is the man and the structure he trusted his life to, and the quiet certainty that comes from understanding exactly how something works instead of simply hoping it will. That is the real lesson buried underneath all the spray foam and steel. Comfort in extreme cold is never an accident. It is never luck. And it is never just a thick enough blanket. It is the sum of dozens of small, deliberate choices, made correctly, stacked one on top of another, until an environment that should be lethal becomes nothing more than background noise outside a warm steel wall. Let me know in the comments if you found this helpful, and subscribe for more videos about how to survive cold winters.